Today we're talking about the classic Mobb Deep song Shook Ones Part 2 and ending in a few surprising places. We'll be tracing this song back through not only Mobb Deep's history, but the Big Band and Jazz Hall of Fame, the show Fat Albert, the country Australia, and Ludwig van Beethoven. I mean, the connection there is obvious, right? I'll show you how each of these things tie into this song, break down the samples, the musical devices, and in the process of recreating this hip-hop classic, we'll see the story in Shook Ones Part 2 become even richer. Mobb Deep's second album, The Infamous, was released in 1995, and some consider it their real debut album. Their first album, Juvenile Hell, was released in 1993 and had some heavy-hitting producers on it, Large Professor, DJ Premier, and more, but even Prodigy admitted, that album was alright, but we wasn't doing our own shit at the time. To us, that album don't even count in the books. We was really thirsty little kids trying to get a deal. Their second album, The Infamous, features most of the production done by Mobb Deep themselves. As Havoc said, "We started producing because other producers was giving that we didn't like, or they was just charging too much. I didn't know nothing about making music, but I learned by watching other dudes." As we're about to see, even if you don't know anything about making music, you can learn a lot from other people. And even if you don't use the same language as I do to describe the music, the core of what's happening here, the feeling, is the same. The Infamous features several guest MCs, including fellow Queensbridge natives Big Noid and Nas, who had just released Illmatic in 1994, Wu-Tang members Raekwon and Ghostface Killah, who just released Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers in 1993, and more. One of the guest producers on this album is Q-Tip, who produced One Love off of Illmatic and had already established himself with A Tribe Called Quest. But on the song Shook Ones Part 2, this is all Mobb Deep. Just Havoc and Prodigy on the verses and their own production. And here's where this gets interesting. Mobb Deep is in this scene with Nas, Wu-Tang, Q-Tip, and more. And each of these artists have slightly different sounds, but Mobb Deep is taking a little bit of each of these and rolling it into their own sound. For example, RZA's production in Wu-Tang is very gritty sounding, low resolution samples and slowing them down significantly to get that Wu-Tang sound. Q-Tip is the primary producer of A Tribe Called Quest and he loves sampling jazz records, and Nas's Illmatic features a lot of jazz samples from Q-Tip and other producers as well. Illmatic doesn't sound as jazzy as a Tribe record, but it's also not as gritty as 36 Chambers. But on Shook Ones Part 2, Havoc and Prodigy have sampled several jazz records and slowed them down drastically, stretching the grit to the limit and then, as we'll discover, stretching it again even further. The result is one of the best hip-hop tracks of all time, so I want to take this piece by piece and talk about the different elements happening musically here. First, we've got the drums. This sample is taken from the song Dirty Feet by the Daley Wilson Big Band from 1975. This group hails from Australia, our first stop on the journey of this song. This is so interesting to me because I don't know about you, but when I think about Australian music, I don't necessarily think of big band jazz. But I mean, of course they have jazz in Australia. It's just that the eighth notes actually swing the opposite way. Alright, I lost the Australian viewers. Sorry guys. Anyway, the Daley Wilson Big Band are more of a rock jazz fusion. Whenever I do production breakdowns like this, I make a Spotify playlist that has all the songs I'm talking about. Check the description for the link. But here's why I do that. Sure, Mobb Deep just sampled the drums from this song, but listen to the rest of this song. It's crazy to me that you can hear something like that and go, nah. Official Queensbridge murderers right there. Anyway, let's sample the drums from the intro and slow it down, which pitches it down in the process. Cut right there. We got that clip and loaded it into the drum rack. Perfect. Next up is the man, the myth, the legend, Quincy Jones. Mobb Deep has sampled the song Kitty with the Bent Frame from Quincy Jones from 1971. This is from a soundtrack that Quincy did for the movie Dollars, which is sometimes referred to as just a dollar sign. It's a very Prince move. Anyway, the portion sampled is more of an effect than anything. It almost sounds like an alarm or a siren or something, and considering the lyrics on Shook Ones, it's probably the effect they're going for. This idea of the music supporting the lyrics goes even further with the next sample, but let's finish this one first. This Quincy Jones song had been sampled several times before, including by the Beatnuts in 1994, Snoop Dogg in 1993, and Mobb Deep themselves in 1992 by way of a DJ Premier remix for the song Cop Hell. But the interesting thing here isn't the sample itself, it's Quincy Jones and his connection to Mobb Deep from multiple angles. Well, I'd like to say a quick thank you to TrackLib for sponsoring this video. Tracklib is an online record store for sampling which has a growing catalog of more than 80,000 original songs and multi-tracks to sample with a 100% guarantee of fast, easy, affordable clearance. But let me make something and show you how it actually works. I'm going to search specifically for something 70s soul. Alright, we got a 60s, 70s soul and funk collection. Already I'm excited, but you can take it a step further than that before you actually download it. In the browser, I can repitch it, I can loop it, and I can add a beat on top of it. So let's see what that would sound like. Alright, I'm happy with this. I'm going to use one of my credits and download it. Alright, I'll keep messing around with this, but when I'm ready to release it, Tracklib makes licensing super easy. Everything in their library is guaranteed for a fast, affordable clearance. If you want to get started yourself, click the sign up link in the description. You'll get 15 tracks to download for free, plus a 30-day trial, which is double the typical trial. Quincy is, of course, a legendary musician, arranger, and producer in multiple genres. I mean, Michael Jackson, Frank Sinatra, etc. And he had solo albums as well, which featured a big band. In this big band was a sax player named Bud Johnson who recorded with Quincy on 4 albums in the late 50s and early 60s. And in 1993, Bud Johnson was inducted into the Big Band and Jazz Hall of Fame, and just 2 years later, his grandson, going by the name of Prodigy, would release the song Shook Ones Part 2, which samples his grandfather's former musical collaborator. This is the second stop on our journey, Quincy's unexpected double tie-in with this song. Alright, let's get the sample in here. Alright, so it's right in here. Right there, let's see. Okay, we'll cut it right about there. Alright, so now we got that in our drum rack. We have one more sample in this song, and that comes to us from another musical legend, Herbie Hancock. Herbie is a jazz legend, having played with Miles Davis, pushing the genre into jazz fusion in the 70s, embracing DJ scratching on his 1983 song Rocket, and so much more. The man is a legend. In addition to all these credits, after the Miles stuff, but before the fusion, in 1969 he composed the soundtrack for a TV special called Hey Hey Hey, It's Fat Albert. This special was a success and was expanded into the show Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids shortly after, so the original special was almost like a pilot episode. Each episode of Fat Albert would have kids deal with a variety of issues, some basic stuff like stage fright or personal hygiene, but it also included some toned-down versions of more serious topics, like stealing, racism, drugs, and gun violence. Anyway, Herbie did the music for the original TV special and also released the music as an album in 1969 titled Fat Albert Rotunda. This is where the Mobb Deep sample is taken, specifically from the song Jessica. Okay, here we go. Just that right there, did you catch it? Here's our sample. Now we're going to slow this sample down quite a bit, and in doing so, it exaggerates everything. The pitch is lower, but the tone of the piano is also eerier, and the timing is more exaggerated. I said on Nas's New York State of Mind that slowing those drums down feels like we're zooming in on the imperfections musically, and also lyrically on the city of New York. Well, knowing that this sample is from a Fat Albert special, then sampled and slowed down, with lyrics on top talking about the violent world Mobb Deep is growing up in, it's kind of the same effect. I mean, Prodigy says, I'm only 19, but my mind is old, and when things get for real, my warm heart turns cold. And in his verse, Havoc says, for every rhyme I write, it's 25 to life, before contemplating if he's going to hell for the things he's done. Before quickly moving on, because he doesn't even have the time to think about that because he has to stay alive. Stretching and slowing the sample like this, it's like the darkest episode of Fat Albert imaginable. This is intense, but this is their life in Queensbridge in the 90s. Now here's that same piano sample pitched down 9 semitones. But there's more. This chord that's being played after being pitched down is an E flat minor. This chord is made up of 3 notes, an E flat, a G flat, and a B flat. If you play just those 3 notes in that order, it sounds like this. This is a dark, sad-sounding chord, but there are other ways you could play this chord, and each have their own subtle differences. If I were to play the same notes of this chord, but instead of the E flat on the bottom, I put the E flat on the top, now the G flat is the lowest note, so that's going to sound like this. This is the same chord, the same notes, but arranged in a different way to give a different sound. I could do the same thing with, instead of a G flat on the bottom, kick this G flat up, make the B flat the lowest note. This would be the second inversion. This is just a different way of playing the same thing for a slightly different effect. If you were to play all these notes together, you get a specific sound, like the piano chord in Nas's New York State of Mind. That's a C sharp minor second inversion. If you were to play them as an arpeggio or separately, you'd get a similar sound, just spread out. Probably the most famous example of an inverted minor arpeggio would be Moonlight Sonata by Ludwig van Beethoven. This piece is from 1801. I'm sure you've heard it before, even if you didn't know what it was. The song plays with this arpeggio and goes all kinds of other places, but I bring all of this up to point two things out. This inverted minor arpeggio is exactly what's happening on Shook One's Part 2. This has been pitched and slowed to much lower than the original Herbie Fat Albert sample, which just exaggerates this specific feeling. This is just an inverted, arpeggiated minor chord. But then they do it again and sample the same section, but make it even lower and even slower. This changes not only the pitch, but also the timing of the notes. So now here's that same piano sample, pitched down an additional 5 semitones, 14 total. In other words, it's a different way of playing the same thing for a slightly different effect. Jazz samples, gritty production, Australian jazz fusion drums, Prodigy's grandfather's musical collaborator, Beethoven, and the darkest, realest episode of Fat Albert ever. This production is all Mobb Deep, but one other producer on the album is Q-Tip. Tippett produced most of Tribe's catalog in addition to one song on Nas's Illmatic. The production on that album is so incredible because it's multiple producers all challenging each other and pushing themselves to be better. And nowhere is that clearer than on the song One Love, when Q-Tip incorporated a unique production method, which I also tried myself with mixed results. But for that story, go watch this video.